Hi, and welcome to this LMN webinar called Estimating 101. In this webinar video, we're going to take you through just the essentials of the basics of estimating. It'll be a good webinar if you want a complete introduction to all the buttons on the estimating screen and what they do, and just the general features. This webinar was designed for people that are fairly new to estimating or are only using a small percentage of the available features on the screen. If you're scared to touch buttons that you don't understand, this is probably the webinar for you, as we'll go through all the buttons and go through what they do. It's also good if you're looking to make pricing changes easier or faster from what you're currently doing. Now, if you have a really good handle or you've built lots of estimates, you'd probably be more interested in our Advanced Estimating or Estimating 201 program. Assuming you're still with us and you want the basics, then let's start by going through LMN estimating with a general screen tour. We'll start at the very basics, which is just explaining the difference between standard and service estimating. Standard estimates are for estimates like construction or installation estimates. They assume that you're going to go do something once and then be done with it. Service estimates are better for recurring estimates. Standard would be something you'd use if you're going to install a patio or a deck or a garden for a client. Service estimates are the estimates that you'd use if you were going to do a maintenance contract for a season, or a snow contract for a season, or an irrigation service contract. Service estimates are for jobs where you're going to repeat a service a certain amount of times. Let's take a quick look now around the standard estimating list. Here you can see a list of all your estimates, the date they were made, customer, address, project name, an ID, a version number if you've set one, and the status. You can click any of these headers to sort by these things, or you can use the filters above to limit the estimates you're looking at. For example, if I was an estimate approver and I just wanted to see the estimates that were waiting for me to approve, I could just go to statuses, ready for approval. And there would show up anything that I was waiting, or any estimates that were waiting on me. Once I went in and changed that status, somebody else might see that, okay, great, now it's been approved. You can also filter by divisions or by active or archived estimates. Archiving estimates is a good way to hide estimates that you don't need to look at anymore. One other handy tool on this screen is the Excel export button. That'll export your list of estimates to an Excel spreadsheet. And then you can do some interesting things like total up the price, or make filters on your estimate column so you can only see certain information. Excel's good if you want to take this information and build some kind of custom report out of it. The other button you might want to get familiar with on this screen is the update estimates. And here you can do things in mass. For example, let's change it to all our estimates visible here. And let's say I want to change the division for a bunch of estimates. Rather than opening them all one at a time, I could simply tick off the estimates I want to change, go to Update, and then do things like change their status, assign them to a specific division, archive old estimates, or mark them to be excluded from my sales reports or metrics. We'll get into that feature a little later. Let's take a look at an estimate now. To open an estimate, all you really need to do is click on it. Here's the first page of the estimate. It's got some basic information on it. Project name is the name you're going to use to identify the name of this project. It's a good idea to put the client last name in there, or if it's a company name. Or if you use job site addresses, that might even be better than the last name, because job site addresses are unique. Estimate IDs will be created for you. It's a unique number that'll let you know what estimate this is. Now, if you don't like our IDs, you can certainly type in your own. But an estimate ID from LMN, every time you make a new one, it'll automatically generate a unique ID for you. Version number is handy if you want to make version numbers of your estimates. So for instance, if I want to take an estimate and add a couple of options and I want to give the client two different versions, there's a Save As New button down here. So you can save an existing estimate as a new estimate, call it version 2, and then make your adjustments or edits. There's an estimate date over here as well. That's whatever date you want it to be, but that's how your estimate will be organized. Most people set this as the date the estimate was first created, but you can change it maybe to the date the estimate was presented to the client. The important thing to remember about the date is when you're doing sales reports, Typically, you're going to specify a date range. This is going to be the determination of what date range it falls into. Division underneath here is the division for this estimate. Now you can create and set up your own divisions down here on the left-hand side. So if I go down here and click divisions, you'll see I've set up enhancement, installation, irrigation, maintenance, and snow. And then I can assign an estimate to any one of these divisions. You can create any number of divisions that you want. Divisions will help you look at estimates by division, but it'll also help you report on sales closing rates by division. If I jump over here to the CRM section and go to reports, you can see I can run a division sales report, either detailed or summary, for a specific division or for all my divisions. I simply specify the date range, and again, that's where our estimate date comes in, and click Generate Report. When I open the report, I'll have a complete history of each division. So for example, this is enhancements, the estimates that are pending and the value of those estimates, the estimates that have been sold and the value of those estimates, and the estimates that have been lost and the value of those estimates. At the bottom, the report will generate me a close rate showing me all statuses, what's been won, what's been lost, and our closing rate. And we'll have that for each and every division. Back to our estimate now. We also have the status. Now, statuses, again, are something you can set up for yourself. It's more or less a sales pipeline. An estimate starts at a certain phase, like it's being estimated, and then would work its way through your internal pipeline. So a typical one might look something like this. While my estimator's estimating it, it's an estimation phase. When they're finished, but they're waiting for it to be approved by someone internally, they're going to flip it to ready for approval. When a manager or owner has reviewed it and it's ready, the manager owner could set it to approved. And then after that, the estimate would be presented to the customer. And at that point, it would either be lost, put on hold, which means maybe they'll do it next year, or it's been won. And in that case, it's pending or in progress or complete or billing complete. Now, although we don't do billing in Landscape Management Network specifically, billing complete is a great tool to make sure that before you flip an estimate to done or final, review it with bookkeeping or accounting to make sure the estimate has been billed 100%, all the little change orders that may have come up on the job are finished, and then, and only then, could you set the estimate to billing complete. Now you can set up your own list of estimate statuses over here on the left-hand side. So here under statuses, you've got your list. You can put your list in any order you want by clicking these arrows. The arrows will change the order of the estimate statuses. And each estimate status has a status of pending, sold, or lost. That's how we do the close rate calculations on our metrics. So for instance, if you were to go to the estimate dashboard and you look at what's been won, what's been closed, what's been lost, our closing rate, our revenue per hour, or any of the reports that I just showed from the CRM section, all those won, lost, closed are driven by your statuses and whether that status has a sales status of either pending, lost, or sold. It's really important to get these set up correctly if you want your CRM or sales reports to be correct. Back to the estimate now. You've also got this field here, which is called Exclude from Stats. Now, Exclude from Stats is really handy if you are going to make multiple versions of an estimate for a client. So for example, let's say I've got a driveway or front yard project for a client, and one has just the driveway. One has the driveway and some lighting. The other has a driveway, lighting, and an irrigation system, as well as a garden. So I've got 3 different versions of my estimate. Now, if you were to keep all 3 in your estimates, your sales closing rate would look bad. Because if you closed one of those jobs, you'd still have 3 of the estimates, and it would only look like you closed about 1/3 of the potential. By clicking Exclude from Stats, what you can do is exclude this estimate from your sales closing rate statistics. So if you didn't want this estimate to be counted in your won, lost, sold type of scenario, then just tick this on here, and it won't be counted. It's really handy if you're making multiple versions of an estimate for a client. Now over on the right-hand side is the client information. So you got address, contact name, contact info, job site name, and job site address. If you want to change this information about an estimate, you can go down here to the Change Client or Job Site button. And at that point in time, I can either pick a different job site for that client, or I could pick a different client entirely by clicking the Change button. Change button here, I'll be able to do a search. And once I find the client I want to use, I can hit Select. And again, I'll be able to select that client, that estimate's contact and the job site and more. Hit cancel if you don't want to continue with those changes. Now there is another button on the screen which is handy. It's called the client name. And although it looks like just a name, if I click this button, it'll open right to the client screen. Now one handy thing I like to show people is that by right-clicking, I can open in a new tab. That way, I still have my estimate open over here in this tab, but I also have my lead open in that tab. Opening things in a new tab saves you from going over to the left and opening a different thing and then having to find your way back into it. By clicking here and go open a new tab, I can jump to a new tab in my browser, play around with the contact as necessary, and then just close that tab when I'm finished with it. It is also a good idea to close your tabs when you're finished with it because it can get confusing when you've got multiple tabs open. And it's also easy to forget to save things. If I open the same estimate in 3 tabs, well, now I've got 3 different versions of that estimate open, and it can get ugly. So I'd recommend when you're done with something, make sure you save it and then close that tab as quickly as possible. Don't have a whole lot of tabs open at once. Now there's another couple buttons on the bottom here, Measure Site and Map Site. Measure Site will pull up the site that I was looking at in a Google map. Now what I can do is literally draw with the drawing tools just by clicking my mouse an area on that site, and down the bottom right hand side it'll show me the size in square feet or meters squared or acres of that property. Another handy tool is the map site. So if you're looking to just quickly give somebody a Google map, print a map for a driver who's going to the area, whatever, you can just hit the map site button and you'll generate a map. And of course you can use your directions over here in Google Maps. Down on the very bottom, we've got estimate assignments. And here's where I can assign a specific salesperson. And the people who have access to your LMN estimating will show here. I can assign an estimator. Once again, this is a list of your users with access to estimating. Setting your salesperson and estimator is important for your CRM reports. If we go back to CRM and we go to reports, you can see here I can look at estimator sales reports and salesperson sales reports. So just like our division report, we can click this, set a date range, and we can pick a specific estimator or just view it for everybody and generate a report. Now this example is an example of a summary report, but here on the summary report, I can see each estimator in my company, how many leads they've entered, how many estimates they've made, total amount estimated, how much is pending, what's been lost, what's been won, and their closing percentage. So we can do that by salesperson or by estimator. And that's why it's important on the estimates to set those correctly. A confidence level. This is how likely I think I am to win this bid. And then it shows me over here who last updated this estimate and the date and time they did so. The other buttons down here are fairly straightforward. You've got a help button, and that's really good to get to know. If you click the help button, you're going to open our website called learnlmn.com. And on this website, we've got all kinds of help videos to walk you through all the different features and functions of estimating, from measuring sites to changing taxes to changing your price to just basic overviews. We also have Mark for QuickBooks Export. So when this estimate has been accepted by the client and you want to sync it to QuickBooks, then you can mark this for QuickBooks Export. And the next time you run a QuickBooks sync, it'll push this estimate over to QuickBooks for you. We can also save as new. That's how I would create a second version of this estimate. I can archive it. That's if this estimate was old, maybe we won it, maybe we didn't, but I just want to kind of hide it from day-to-day view. I'll click archive, and then it won't show up by default on my list anymore. I can still find it, because on the list you can still change your filter to show archived estimates, but it just hides it from day-to-day view. Then of course you got your delete and your save. Over here, there's back to estimates and back to lead button. So if I just wanted to go back to my list of estimates, I can go back to estimates, and it takes me back here. Or if I go back to lead, it'll actually take me back to the original lead I had assigned to that estimate. Now let's take a look at the basics of pricing. We're going to get more into detail on pricing jobs and changing it and everything, but the basics are here. You've got work areas and pricing. Now a work area is simply a subtotal on the estimate. So for example, on this estimate, I've got a premium paver driveway, a walkway, a garden, and lighting. And each one of these sections has a price for the customer. That's why I've sort of broken it down by work areas so that I can give a customer a couple of subtotals on the estimate. To see what's inside or to edit the prices inside this premium driveway, for example, I'm going to click the edit button, and there you'll see all the labor, equipment, materials, and subs, the quantities, the cost, the prices, all the things you'd expect from an estimate. When I'm done with the driveway, I'll close that, and I'll go into the walkway, for instance, and I can work my way through that. That's where I'm going to build all my prices, and we'll go through that a little bit later in the webinar in detail so we can show you all the advanced features and functions. Client notes is what you're going to use when you print a proposal or email a proposal to a client. It's what you're going to use to give them notes or descriptions about your work. So here's where you'll type in things like your description of your paver patio or your driveway or your walkway or your plant warranties or any of the things that you want to show up on a customer proposal. So the customer proposal by default will show the name, for instance, garden, the price, and then the notes that you enter here. Crew notes are similar, but crew notes are for the crews. So for example, if I wanted to give them a small tool checklist for a paver driveway, or I wanted to tell them where to pick up the plants for the garden or whatever, I could put that in here. Here I've given the crew some plant specifications underneath the garden. When we print a job planner from this estimate for our crews, these are the notes that are going to come out on the job planner. We've also got the analysis screen, and the analysis screen breaks down some different metrics about the job site. We'll cover that in a later section of this webinar, but here you can see things like gross profit, net profit, revenue per hour, important things to look at before you finalize the estimate for the client. And last but certainly not least, you've got your print options. So you've got all kinds of options for your proposals and job planners and review, and then you can choose how you want to output them. The print button here is what's going to launch that report. Now that we're done the screen tour, let's get into the basics of pricing a job. So here we're going to look at adding things to an estimate like labor, equipment, materials, and subs, and setting up our prices and quantities. Here on the estimate screen, and this time looks a little different, but it's because I'm looking at a service estimate instead of a standard estimate. It's got a different color header, and you'll also see over here a couple of fields that the standard estimate didn't have. We've got billing type, so how it's being billed, and visits. We'll explain those in a minute. So service estimates and standard estimates both have this idea of subtotals. Now on a standard estimate, it's called a work area. On a service estimate, it's called a service. But inside each subtotal are lists of labor and equipment and materials of the things you're estimating. So for example, here I got spring cleanup, and inside that would be labor, equipment, materials. And that, or the total of that, is going to be my spring cleanup price. And then I'm going to have a mowing price. Now on a service estimate, I need to make sure that any service that has a different number of visits is going to be in its own service category. For instance, I wouldn't want to put fertilizing and mowing together because I'm going to mow 30 times, but I'm only going to fertilize 4 times. And therefore, because there's such a difference in number of visits, there's no way I want the time required for fertilizing built in the mowing, and vice versa. Let's take a look now at how to add just the basics of an estimate. So let's add to this estimate here a work area called garden weeding, for example. So I'll hit add service, and it's going to ask me for the service name. This is what I'm going to call garden bed weeding. Billing type, so this is asking me, are you going to bill each and every time you do it? That's called per visit. Are you going to bill this as part of a seasonal contract or monthly price? That's per season. Or are you going to bill this hourly? So depending on how you're going to bill it, I'm going to set it up here. We'll say this one's included in our seasonal or monthly rate. Now, number of visits is going to be how many times we're going to go do this, estimated or actual. Here, for example, maybe our contract stipulates that we're going to go 6 times and weed the beds. And then I'm going to set up a cost code. A cost code is what's going to drive job costing. So by picking the cost code of landscape maintenance, when I export this estimate to QuickBooks, the revenue from this estimate is going to go to my landscape maintenance department. That's the function of cost codes. So you click OK, and now we've got this new garden bed weeding line item as part of the estimate. But right now it's got no cost or no break even or no price because we haven't actually added anything to it. Top right here, it says add items and templates. This is how we're going to add things. So we'll go through a couple of different ways to add things. The most basic or most familiar way is when you go add items and templates, it opens up your labor catalog and equipment catalog and material catalog that you set up in LMN. So here, for instance, I might go to labor and I'm going to pick maintenance labor because it's a maintenance crew that's going to do the weeding. And for equipment, now they only need really just a truck and I'm not sure, who's doing it. If your mowing crew is doing it, then maybe it's the crew truck and the whole maintenance trailer. But if it's a separate crew doing it, maybe they're just using a crew truck with a dump trailer. So you'd pick the one that was most relevant. And then for material, because this is garden bed weeding, I really have very little material, but I probably maybe have some disposal. So I'm going to call this disposal yard waste. And I've got a line item here for disposing waste by the yard. When you're done adding things to your work area or service, you close this down. And now you can see all the details. So for instance, I could set that, we think it's going to be about 3 hours each time we do this. Now, very important here is you're using man hours. So 3 man hours would be a 3-person crew for 1 hour. Or if it was a 1-person crew, it'd be a 1-person crew for 3 hours. But it's essential that this is always estimated in man hours. Now, if we're going to assume this is a 3-person crew for 1 hour, then I've got 3 man hours up here, and I got 1 truck hour because the 3 people are all in the same truck. So it's 1 truck with 3 people in it. That's where we're getting the 1 hours and 3 hours. It's really important when you're estimating to remember that. This is man hours, and the truck or equipment is probably just in site hours. And then I'd estimate the amount of disposal. And let's say we're going to estimate half a yard of disposal every time we go. So now I've got time, equipment, and material costs. Over here, I've got my costs, and here's my unit price, and my price per visit based on my quantity times my unit price, and how much profit I'm making. Now, I can make any changes to this pretty easily. If I want to change the cost, for instance, maybe this job site is a long way away from our shop, and I want to up the unit cost of labor to cover some unbilled time. I just simply go in here and change the cost. If I want to change the unit price, so what we're charging for the hour, let's say, for example, I wanted to get really aggressive on this, and maybe we're only going to charge the client $35 an hour. So I could click the pencil there, type in 35, and it would show me now at $35 an hour, we're barely making any profit on this. And I could also change the seasonal price. So if you wanted to give people a difference between, hey, listen, if we're going to charge you per visit, I've got one price, or per season, I'm going to give you a cheaper price. I could, for example, override the seasonal price with a cheaper price if I wanted to give the client a per visit price that was different than a per season price. Maybe you give them a discount if they sign up for the whole season. That's how I would do that. A couple of things to watch for here. This thing turned blue because I changed the unit price. So visually, when you're reviewing an estimate, it's pretty easy to see the things that you've overridden because the unit price now shows up as blue. If I want to revert this back to our default price, I just click that button again, and that undo button will revert it back to the default price that's in my catalog. Same thing with profit. So over here, I'm making 10.4% profit. If I wanted to change this, I can click this, and I can change it to 5%. And now this price and this price are reflective of a 5% net profit. Once again, I can see I edited it because of this blue, and if I hit undo, it'll do that. Another handy thing is if you do set a quantity to 0, you'll see that the quantity and the price shows up in red. So another thing when you're visually reviewing it to look for when you see things in red, remember to note whether or not that you've done that intentionally or whether you've forgotten something. That is the basics of estimating. And if we're going to do a service estimate, we probably have a pretty simple list of items here. If you're going to do a construction estimate, it's probably a bigger list of materials, for instance, but it's the same process. It's add items and templates. Now, one of the biggest things that gets people slowed down when they're first estimating construction work is the amount of materials that would be needed to make a construction estimate. For instance, a deck. The proper way to estimate a deck, and if you really want it done nicely, is to go through and estimate the amount of boards you're going to need and what size and lengths of each board. 2 reasons for that. 1, we're going to get a really accurate price. And 2, the estimate is going to be able to give us a pick list of materials. So at some point anyway, I have to figure out what lengths of boards I'm going to order and how many. So why not do it when we're estimating to make sure we're pricing it right? But when you're getting started, especially when you're getting started, you may not have all your materials set up yet. And it would be slow and sometimes you don't have the time for it to enter in all those boards individually. So let's take a look at a shorter, easier way of building an estimate. Here, for example, I flip back to a construction job and I'm going to add a work area called deck. And we'll set this to hardscaping and I'll hit OK. So now I've got this deck as part of my estimate. Now the right way to do this would be to go add items. I'm going to need a construction crew. They're going to need a construction truck and trailer. And then I'd go to material and pick all my deck boards. I'd add a box of screws, that kind of stuff in here. But maybe, for whatever reason, you don't have that stuff set up yet. So let's just do this the quick way. Over on the right-hand side of your material button here, you're going to click New. What I can do here is go Deck Materials. And I can just bundle all my deck materials. Let's say we're going to spend $2,100 on deck materials. So I'm just going to bundle all my deck materials with one clean unit cost of $2,100. This isn't going to do anything for me when it comes to ordering the materials because it's all just lumped together, but it makes estimating really fast. I can set here a shipping factor and a warranty factor if it's applicable. And I can obviously now set a custom profit margin or price. Let's assume my 10% profit is fine. So it's marking my materials up for overhead, for profit, it's here. Now I wouldn't want to save it to catalog because these materials are specific to this job. So I'm just going to go add to estimate, this button right here. And by adding to estimate, what I've done is just really quickly added $2,100 worth of deck materials to this deck. I'll get this out of the way now. And now all I need to do is enter my hours. So if it's let's say it's 2 guys on this deck for 3 days at 10 hours a day. So we'll put 60 hours on that. And we'll put 30 truck hours with a truck and trailer. And I have now bid my deck at about $5,600. I've got 60 hours of labor, 30 hours of truck and trailer, and all my deck materials lumped into one line item. So adding units or adding materials on the fly is a really fast way of estimating when you're getting LMN started. Obviously, in the big picture, you want to come up with material lists for accurate pricing and purchase orders and all that good stuff. But there's a very fast way when you're getting started to just lump some materials into your estimate. Also very handy if I just want to put a budget line item on an estimate. So let's say I wanted to estimate an irrigation system for this client, but instead of picking, they don't even know whether they're going to go ahead. So instead of picking all the fixtures and heads and all the details of an irrigation system, once again, I'm going to add an irrigation system. Now, I'm going to still break it down roughly by labor and a truck. But again, for materials, I'm just going to go irrigation budget. And let's say I'm going to estimate again, say $2,500 worth of irrigation parts. Now we make a little more profit on our irrigation parts. So I'm going to up the profit to say 30% net. And I'm just going to add to estimate. And now, just like on the other one, I'm just going to say, okay, if it's 2 guys for 4 days on this site, we're going to put in the hours and the truck and trailer. And I've got one line item of my irrigation budget, which is going to be $2,500 worth of parts. And now I've very quickly estimated an irrigation system, at least especially for a budgeting. If I'm going to give the client a rough budget for the irrigation system, now I've got a budget cost and a budget price for them. And that's how to build something really quickly without having to have all your materials set up. Again, really useful for companies getting started. If you want to change the order of the way things are appearing on the estimate, let's say, for example, I wanted the deck up before the garden, simply go in here, put a new number in there, and then click off it or tab off it, and this order here will sort it in whatever order that you want. Next thing is that maybe you decide you want to change the price for the deck as a whole. So this deck, for instance, is $56.53.43. Instead of going in and changing all my unit prices, if I just want to make a change to the overall deck price, the fastest way to change your price is to go up here and to say override price. Now what this is going to do is override the price for the entire deck. So I could go override price. Let's just set the deck to $5,700 and hit OK. And it will then set my deck to as close as possible $5,700. Now you saw in this case here, I'm a little bit short. The reason for that is quantity times unit price just didn't happen to equal 5,700 exactly. It's just unfortunately math to 2 decimal places. But there's a way. I can fix the rounding though with a rounding factor. Simply add my items, and in your other catalog, add something called a rounding factor. I'll add the rounding factor item to this estimate, and now all I'll do is simply set it to the cents I need to add to now break even. So now you can see my price is $5,700. And now I've got my nice neat price for a job. Now I can also edit the profit margin for the entire estimate all at once as well. So here under the edit, I can override price or override profit for a specific work area. But if I want to change it for the entire estimate, so for example, this estimate's 17% profit. If I wanted to get a little bit leaner on the price, I could go set profit, change the profit for the entire estimate to 15%. It's going to say, are you sure? Because now it's going to override the price for every single item on this estimate. If you're sure, you can click OK, and it'll take it to 15% or whatever it is you entered. Now, there is a way to undo that if you want to get it back. There's a button here called Refresh Pricing. Refresh Pricing requires that you've saved your changes. So I'm going to save my changes right now. Now, if I want to refresh my pricing, what it'll do is go back to my catalog and pull back in all my default prices. So if I clicked Refresh Pricing right now, it would say, we're going to go back and get all your default prices for your catalog. So I'd click OK. Now, in some states and provinces or countries, the taxes change based on the kind of work you do. For instance, maybe if you're doing hardscapes, it's not taxable, but softscapes, it is taxable. So what you can do is set your tax defaults to the most common scenario, then use the Edit Taxes button. The Edit Taxes button will allow me to say, for the different types I'm doing, labor, equipment, materials, subs, other, what tax settings I've got. So for example, if I have to charge tax on softscapes, on the labor and the materials, what I can do is set my tax rate to applicable on labor on materials. And then here, I'm just going to apply it to my garden work area. Now I could apply it to all by doing that. But in this case, if taxes just changed, if it's a specific type of work like softscapes, I'll put my new tax settings over here. I'll apply it only to the garden and I'll hit OK. And that'll change the tax settings here for the garden. If I go to garden and edit taxes, you'll see that my sales tax has been set to HST for everything there. So that's how to edit your taxes for a specific or a couple specific work areas. Finally, we should take a look at cost codes here. And cost codes are, again, when you export to accounting, the account or the service item to which the revenue is going to be booked to. So you want to make sure that your cost codes are set to wherever you want the value of the revenue to go. So for example, here I've got $7,000 irrigation system, but my cost code is unassigned. So right now, this estimate would not be able to be exported to QuickBooks because it doesn't know where to dump the revenue. By clicking your cost code, you can set up your own cost codes over here on the left-hand side. By clicking the cost code section here, I'm going to pick my irrigation cost code, and then I'm going to click Save down there. And then when I export this estimate to QuickBooks, this revenue will get booked to my irrigation department. And that's more or less the basics of pricing work. If you understand simply how to add a work area, add items, change your quantities and prices, then you've got the basics down. Certainly there'll be another webinar called Estimating 201 that'll take some more advanced features like using the hold button, copying estimates, copying work areas, importing work areas. We'll go through some of those more advanced features in the other webinar. Now that we've taken a look at the basics of pricing jobs, let's now look to the analysis screen. Then we'll come back at the end to look at printing and how we get some text on the estimates. So we'll look back at our estimate now, and I'm going to go up here to the tab called Analysis. And what analysis is going to do is summarize some of the financial information from your estimate to give you good information on whether you're making money or not. Over here, you've got total price, cost of goods sold, so that's your actual cost of doing the work, and your gross profit. Your gross profit is price minus the cost of doing the work. So out of your gross profit, you have to actually make net profit, but you also have to pay your overhead bills. So overhead is displayed here, and that's based on the overhead recovery factors that your budget set for your estimate. Then you've got your break even. That's your actual cost of work after overhead is paid. So if I was to take this work at absolutely no profit, just cover the costs of labor, equipment, material, subs, and overhead, I could do this job as cheap as $29,600. I wouldn't want to, but if you were in a recession or depression or some very, very competitive scenario, or maybe you're buying a job to get a good relationship with a general contractor or a city, that's the lowest you'd want to go to at least cover your costs on the job. And net profit's actually what's left over after all your bills have been paid. Over here, it's going to show you a graph. So the graph represents the selling price of the job. And then out of that selling price, 25% is going to go to labor, 8.9% to equipment, 33% to materials, nothing on this estimate for subs. 18.5% of the selling price on this job is going to cover overhead, and profit is what left over. Gross profit and net profit, Remember again, gross profit is your profit before overhead is paid. Net profit is your profit after overhead is paid. And then down here, what it's going to do is compare this estimate to the budget that was used to price this estimate to give you. Your budget says that you should be hitting about a 34% gross profit. Your estimate says you're just a little bit short of that. Close, but a little short. But here on this hand, my budget's net profit is actually lower than this estimate's net profit. So even though we're not quite doing as well on gross, we're actually making more net than the budget says we need to. And then over here is the revenue per hour, the sales per hour. What that is that the price of the job divided by the number of hours worked or number of hours you've estimated in labor on the job. The more sales your labor estimates or your labor delivers per hour, the more profitable you'll tend to be at the end of the year. So this particular estimate has higher revenue per hour than the budget. It's our belief that you need to look at all three when you're actually evaluating a job. This example of a job shows one that maybe doesn't have quite the gross profit we expected, but it's got a good net profit and it's got a good sales per hour. If my estimate's revenue per hour is greater than my budget, it's going to help me beat my sales goal. If my estimate's revenue per hour is less than my budget, well, that's hurting me from hitting my sales goal. So I have to look at all these factors together to really get a good sense of how profitable or how bad you want this estimate at this price. Of course, if I wasn't satisfied with this, I'd go back to the work areas and pricing, and I'd start making my changes. I could increase price, decrease price, set a new net profit, do all those kind of things that we looked at earlier. Next up, we're going to take a look at how to print estimates and print reports from the estimate. But before we actually get into the printing and emailing of estimates, let's actually look at where the text is going to be coming from. Back to our estimate now. We haven't really looked at text yet. Up on top here, there's something called client notes. And what client notes will do is create a section for each work area on your estimate. So for example, over here, I've got premium driveway, basic driveway, walkway, deck, garden, etc. Each one of those will have a section under the client notes where we can enter notes for that section. So there's my lighting notes, for example. So I'd go into here and I'd open these up and you can start typing whatever you need to type in here. And when you're done, you can shut it down and save it. But a faster way of entering notes is to set up something called terms and conditions. And that's why you see the thing over here called add terms and conditions. What I'm going to do is show you right now the terms and conditions screen, where you can set up default descriptions of work. And I've got some examples here of warranty or planting warranty or payment terms or exclusions. But you can set up default terms and specifications. I'm going to open one of these to show you all it is a name and a list of what it's available on and some text. So if I wanted to add this warranty, planting warranty to a job, I'd simply open the job. I'll do it here for the garden. Let's clear this out right here. So I'll open the job. I'll go up here to add terms and conditions, and it'll bring up my terms and conditions list. So I'll pick the one I want. So for example, we're going to grab our planting warranty, and I'm just going to click the plus button. It'll enter all those terms and conditions in there, and then I'll hit save. That's a lot faster than typing them in every time. So definitely get used to setting up terms and conditions so that you can do what I just did. Now, of course, now we can change them. So if there are specific considerations on this estimate that don't apply, we can just take them out and delete it. I can do everything I want now, and it won't affect my defaults. But that's how to set it up very quickly. You also have things called estimate header terms and conditions and estimate footer terms and conditions. And these are the things that would go, the header text is what goes before the pricing. The footer text is what goes after the pricing. And what that'll give you the ability to do is just before you show your prices and just after, enter more text. For instance, just after, you might get into things like your acceptance of work, your payment terms and conditions, specific exclusions, that kind of thing, more like your contract lingo. And once again, you can set those up as defaults too. So I'm just going to flash back to the terms and conditions screen. And again, to get to this screen, under the estimate menu, terms and conditions, we can add new ones here, but we can also set up defaults. So if I go up to the set up defaults button, you can see here that on my standard estimate, that's my default header. And on my standard estimate, this is my default footer. And I would have the same thing for service estimates and service footers as per whatever I set up there. So every time I make a new estimate, these are automatically going to be added to the header and footer sections of my estimate. Once again, it'll save you a lot of typing time if you set these up. It also makes your contract terms and conditions and your descriptions a lot more standardized from estimator to estimator, so that each estimator is working off the same standardized list. Now let's take a look at how to print an estimate. So to print or email an estimate, we're just going to go to the print tab right here. We're going to pick one of these reports. So there's all kinds of different reports. There's a bunch of different layouts of customer proposals because they show different types of information. Show materials, don't show materials, show all, show my unit prices, hide my unit prices. You've got some options there. You've also got some ways to review the estimate, ways to print reports about estimate job costs, job planners and some different layouts. Those will go to your crews. And then you got some things like a profitability summary and a purchase order. In order to generate one of these reports, we're just going to pick one. We're going to hit the print button and then open the report to actually open it. Now, some of you may set up your PDFs to be opened by default by Adobe Reader, which I have here. Others may see it open right in their browser. I prefer to set my defaults to Adobe Reader because I can just click the email button up here now and I can email this proposal direct to a customer. Whereas if you do that in the browser's default PDF reader, you don't have that setting unless you have a plugin for your browser. So you can contact us at support@golmn.com and we can show you some different ways. You can decide that you want to open it up in your browser or open it up with Adobe PDF Reader. But either way, we can help you with a quick button that'll let you email it right out of the system. Just a quick configuration change on your browser. It's a browser setting. So if you wanted to print an estimate, obviously I'd just go to the print and I'd open the report. If I wanted to email, same thing. I'm going to open it, but then I'm just going to click the email button. Now, once you land the job, you're probably going to look at the job planner. And the job planner looks like this. And this is more designed for our crews. So the job planner includes things like the name, specifications of the work, hours, equipment, materials, no prices on the planner, vendor names over here so the guys know where it's coming from. You also have options for purchase orders down here, which will pull from those vendor names and give you an organized total list of material by vendor. So these are the ones I haven't created any vendors for, but if I keep scrolling down, you can see here, Acme Disposal, I need 6 bins. And if I keep going down, Bloom's Garden Center, that's what we need to get from them. And all that is driven by my internal notes section on my estimate. I'll show you where that comes from here. We're going to go to work areas and pricing. I'm going to open a work area, for instance, my garden, and then I'm going to go to edit notes. And here in the internal description field is where I'm going to get the vendor name that organizes that purchase order report. So that's how to print reports out of the system as well. Let's take a quick look now at some sample estimates just to give you a feel of what a completed estimate might look like. On the construction end, it's fairly simple, and the one we were going through is a pretty good explanation. You'd have work areas here for each different subtotal that you wanted to offer the client. Every time you wanted to give the client sort of a breakdown of a price, that's a new work area. We just go here to add work areas. Inside each work area is a complete list of the labor, equipment, materials, subs, and other items to arrive at the total price for that work area. So that's where we're going to get the labor hours, the equipment costs, all that kind of good detail. And then, of course, your notes are here for the client. These are the notes that are going to show up on your client proposals. Your crew notes are here. These are the notes that are going to show up crew specific on your job planners. And the way to print all the estimate is over here on the print. Your save changes up here. And when you're done with the estimate, you also may need to mark it for QuickBooks Export to make sure it gets exported to QuickBooks accurately. Let's take a look now at some sample service estimates, though. They're a little trickier to put together, mainly because of the visits and the different billing types. But a service estimate might look very much like this. I've got spring cleanup, mowing, fertilizing, fall cleanup, and garden bed weeding. Let's put this one right underneath mowing, just for better organization. In a service estimate, you're likely to have a few different services, but the services themselves will probably be really easy inside. Labor and equipment is typically all you need for a maintenance contract. Once in a while, you will need materials. For instance, here in the spring cleanup, I've got labor, I've got equipment, and I've got a line for disposal. But that makes estimating service items pretty quick and easy, actually. The only big difference is that you've got these things that you got to worry about here, number of visits. And it's super important that for each different service that requires a different number of visits, you create those independently. They should be their own work area. So just to recap what we talked about earlier, garden bed weeding has to be on its own because there's 6 visits of bed weeding where there's 30 visits of mowing. And if I built the weeding time into the mowing, I would actually be building 30 units of the weeding time. We don't do that service 30 times, we do it 6 times. Therefore, it needs to be its own service. Other than that, service estimates are very similar to construction estimates, and that's a good example of what one might look like. And that brings us to the conclusion of this webinar. If you got some information out of this one, but we're looking for a little more hints and tips and tricks, then make sure you tune into our Estimating 201 webinar. And in that webinar, we're going to go through a lot more advanced features of estimating. So really how to use the hold button, copying, importing, a lot of the things that'll make estimating a lot faster and easier for those who are already familiar with the system. If you had any questions about the content in this webinar, or you want to know more information about our Estimating 201 webinar, be sure to reach out to us at support@golmn.com, and we'll get you the answers that we need. And those who are just looking at LMN, for more information about LMN and our software, check out www.golmn.com. There's a live chat right on our website during working hours if you have any questions while you're reviewing. Thanks again for watching, and we'll hope we'll catch you in another video.